Hey, what's up, guys? Hope you all had some good holidays. We've been exploring North Carolina, and there are so many interesting histories that are kind of hard to find unless you actually go to these areas. I have a lot of different stuff that I want to talk about, but I'm gonna break it up into different videos for simplicity. Today, I'm gonna be talking about Transylvania County in Brevard, North Carolina. West North Carolina has some beautiful scenery and mountain towns that are worth checking out. We originally came to Brevard because we hiked Devil's Courthouse. I'm going to talk about that in the next video, but I just wanted to bring it up because it was pretty awesome and right by Brevard. It wasn't snowing, but the trees were frozen up, and it just had a really unique vibe with all the white trees but no snow on the ground. There were also countless waterfalls in the area, which is bizarrely called Transylvania County. Apparently, the story goes that Transylvania County came into being in 1861 when a state representative named Joseph P. Jordan introduced a bill to the North Carolina House of Commons to establish a new county. Supposedly, he was born in Transylvania, so Jordan decided to use that name for this new county. Transylvania in Latin meaning trans for across and sylvan for woods. And it does kind of look like it could be Transylvania in the winter. Apparently there were vampires near here, but that's for another video. Brevard has a small downtown with all the same features that we're used to seeing. Even an old Freemason lodge whose first meeting was in 1866. We will cover some of the buildings in a moment, but one of the most fascinating things about Brevard is how it was named. It's named after Dr. Ephraim Brevard, a Revolutionary War surgeon who penned the Mecklenburg Resolves. This is interesting because there's a mystery or a conspiracy surrounding this document. The Mecklenburg Resolves are thought to be the basis for the so-called Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, claimed to be the first Declaration of Independence in America, predating the United States Declaration of Independence by more than a year. Historians largely dismissed the Mecklenburg Declaration, and the original document was conveniently lost in a fire. But if this is true, it would mean that the American Declaration of Independence wasn't some wholly original or groundbreaking document, but rather a derivative piece, borrowing from earlier declarations that had already existed. This would change the entire mainstream narrative of the Revolution and place North Carolina at the forefront of the independence movement, rather than Virginia or Massachusetts. North Carolinians have long maintained that the Mecklenburg Declaration is genuine. This belief is supported by the Halifax Resolves, passed by the North Carolina Provincial Congress on April 12, 1776. The Halifax Resolves were the first official call for independence by a colony, which supports North Carolina's claim to be the first to break ties with Great Britain. Even the official seal and flag of North Carolina displays the dates of both the original Declaration of Independence and the Halifax Vote. There was also a holiday that is not as popular now, but it was called Mech Deck Day, celebrated on May 20th. If the Mecklenburg Declaration were proven genuine, it would drastically alter how we view the American Revolution. It would place North Carolina as the central revolutionary force in America. Maybe the document was set on fire on purpose, because this hints at a more broader resistance movement that predated the colonial elite's formal decision to sever ties with Britain. It's possible that this was a network of early revolutionary sentiments that were suppressed or overshadowed by the elite's narrative. Meaning, the American Declaration of Independence served as a tool to consolidate power among colonial elites, a strategic move to overshadow and suppress earlier independence efforts, including those by indigenous groups and other lost communities. The Iroquois Confederacy, for example, was a sophisticated allegiance of indigenous nations with governance systems that are said to have influenced some colonial structures. Could these pre-existing systems of resistance and governance be the source for what we are told is the colonial movement toward independence? I'm going to go more into that on another video when we discuss the idea that there was already a pre-existing government here in the States. But I found it interesting that this small town in the mountains is connected to this lost history of the Mecklenburg Declaration, being named after the author of the document. Well, let's get into the history that we're told of Brevard. The area that would become Brevard was originally inhabited by the Cherokee, whose lands encompassed much of what is now western North Carolina. By the early 1800s, Scots-Irish settlers began arriving, drawn to the region's fertile land, abundant wildlife, and natural resources. They established small farms and communities, utilizing the French Broad River for transportation and sustenance. Early settlements often centered around trails and trading routes, such as the ancient Indian path that ran through the area, later developed into roads linking the region to neighboring towns. This area originally was settled in the 1700s as part of South Carolina, then became Walton County, Georgia in 1803, then was finally fought over and won by North Carolina in 1811, which was a part of Henderson and Jackson counties. This is kind of weird, but apparently in 1803, Georgia legislature petitioned the U.S. Congress to allow Georgia a 12-mile tract of land in North Carolina. This small tract was called the Orphan Strip, strangely, and was originally inhabited by the Cherokee. Was this because this place contained a bunch of orphans? The story goes that it was named that because after the American independence, rather than farmers and families, there were rebellious Cherokee, outlaws, and fugitives inhabiting this area. It was originally a populated Cherokee area, and the first state to claim the strip was South Carolina. Then, in 1787, South Carolina ceded the land to the US government, and the federal government gave it back to the Cherokee. But for some reason in 1798, the Cherokee transferred the land back to the US government again. As you can see, it doesn't really make that much sense, but it gets stranger. At this point, the territory was largely unregulated and lacked clear sovereign authority. Georgia laid claim to the land, but during the late 1700s and early 1800s, the Yazoo land scandal is proof on how chaotic and corrupt land dealings in the region had become. The Yazoo land scandal was one of the most significant real estate frauds in early US history. Georgia governors and legislators sold millions of acres of land at outrageously low prices to insiders and political allies, all while Native American claims to much of the territory had not been extinguished. These transactions, often for less than a penny per acre, exposed how the state's leadership used their positions to enrich themselves and their associates at the expense of the public and indigenous communities. The fallout from this scandal was so intense that it led to public outrage, calls for reform, and intervention by the federal government. Okay, but let's think about it. The Yazoo scandal could be a cover-up for a pattern of land grabs and insider deals that consolidated the power among a select few. This could have been a convenient way for the elites to claim vast tracts of land under the guise of development, while pushing out native populations and/or the previous inhabitants of this area. The Fletcher v. Peck case, which ruled these contracts could not be invalidated, set a precedent that prioritized the rights of those who profited from the fraud over justice for those who were displaced. This raises the question of whether the scandal was part of a broader system designed to seize and distribute land to maintain control in the hands of a few powerful groups, which effectively reshaped the map of the South through corruption and legal manipulation. Interestingly, there was a dispute about this in 1971, where the Georgia Legislative Commission reported that they still had a claim on the Orphan Strip. The push for the creation of Transylvania County was finalized in 1861, as residents of western Henderson County sought a more accessible county seat. On February 15, 1861, the North Carolina legislature approved the formation of Transylvania County, and Brevard was selected as the county seat. The town was founded on land donated by Alex F. England, Leander S. Gash, and Braxton C. Langford, with 50 acres designated for development. By the end of the Civil War, Brevard was a small but growing settlement, with essential structures like a courthouse, jail, 2 churches, and a handful of stores and homes. In decades following the Civil War, Brevard's growth accelerated, spurred by agriculture, logging, and the arrival of the Transylvania Railroad in 1899. The railroad connected Brevard to Hendersonville and beyond, enabling the transport of timber, which became the cornerstone of the local economy. This railroad was originally the Hendersonville and Brevard Railroad, which opened in 1895. The Hendersonville and Brevard Railway for some reason went bankrupt and then was bought by the Toxaway Company. Now let's talk about Lake Toxaway before we get into downtown Brevard, because it's kind of a crazy story. Lake Toxaway is the largest privately owned lake in North Carolina. It was originally constructed in 1903 by E.H. Jennings and was the first artificial lake built in the Appalachian Mountains. At the time, it was created to support the development of the Toxaway Inn, a luxury resort intended to attract wealthy vacationers to the region. It seems a little crazy to want to build all this in the middle of nowhere for wealthy elites, not considering the amount of effort it would have taken in the early 1900s. Sure, the scenery is beautiful, but an immense amount of money was poured into this place, and its history raises some serious questions. The Toxaway Inn was a massive 5-story hotel with interiors that rivaled Grand City structures, featuring towering pillars and opulent design. Strangely, despite it being in the middle of nowhere, the inn had every modern convenience of the time, including elevators, steam heat, electric lights, its own power plant, telegraph and long-distance phone service, a chandelier-lit ballroom, large verandas, and open fireplaces in common areas. For entertainment, the resort provided amenities that seem almost excessive given its location. Daily string orchestra concerts, golf, bowling, tennis courts, horseback riding, and even organized hunting trips in the surrounding forest. It's clear that this wasn't just for the average traveler, it catered to the ultra-wealthy. Figures like Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Harvey Firestone, and members of the Vanderbilt family are known to have stayed there. Was this really just a resort, or is there something else going on with this place? Interestingly, the Toxaway Inn was marketed as a Christian resort, but it seems to be some type of meeting place for elites. Obviously, you're going to have lodges in the mountains, but some of these lodges have interesting names. For example, the Bacchus Lodge in Canaan Land. Seems like a bizarre name for a Christian lodge. It's not far-fetched to wonder if this Christian resort label was a convenient cover for something else. Many resorts of this area were known to host discreet gatherings of influential individuals, and the secluded location would have been perfect for such events. And then there's the issue of documentation, or the lack of it. While R.H. Skaden, a photographer hired by the Toxaway Company, documented much of the area's development, there are no surviving construction photos that I could find of the inn itself. How does a project of this scale leave so little photographic evidence? They tell us that Lake Toxaway and the Toxaway Inn was completed in approximately 1 year, from 1902 to 1903. The lake was created first, with the dam completed in 1902, and the inn followed, opening its doors in 1903. But it gets weirder. In 1916, after unprecedented rainfall caused the Toxaway Dam to collapse, the lake drained catastrophically, sending over 5 billion gallons of water cascading into South Carolina. Remarkably, there was only one reported casualty, a mule. The Toxaway Inn survived the flood, but without the lake, its purpose was lost. For the next 33 years, that's weird, the inn stood abandoned before being demolished in 1947. Why was it left to decay for so long, and why was the dam designed without a mechanism to control water levels, almost guaranteeing a disaster? The area around Lake Toxaway was once nicknamed America's Switzerland because of its beauty and luxury, but the 1916 flood effectively erased that history. Entire communities were displaced and the area fell into decline. What if the flood wasn't purely accidental and was a deliberate plan to cover up something? Whether financial scandals, hidden activities at the inn, or even this structure and more already being in this location even earlier than the official date. But it is strange that it was called America's Switzerland, because a lot of the architecture in the Appalachian Mountains around North Carolina has this style of architecture, and there's no real explanation for it, just like the architecture in Asheville. There's actually a city called Little Switzerland in North Carolina that I want to visit soon, but they have this emerald mine that looks interesting. At first, sure, you can explain all these European names of the surrounding counties and cities as just coincidence. But at some point it becomes bizarre, as if there's something else going on, not just that the surrounding hills reminded a certain person of a place in Europe, which is the standard official narrative. Well, let's talk about the buildings in Brevard. The streets were dirt roads and did not have street lighting until the mid-20s. Which is weird because it's quite clear that all these buildings downtown go beneath the street, meaning the streets were raised at some point. You can see this with a few buildings that go beneath street level. The first building that stands out is the Transylvania County Courthouse, with its distinct European style of architecture. The story goes that after Transylvania County was established in 1861, they needed a courthouse, but they waited until 1866 to build a 2-story frame courthouse. Then in 1874, they say they started constructing this brick courthouse, which was the first brick building in Brevard. A brick building like this in 1870s is interesting, as there wasn't really anything out here. The population was below 200 people. Apparently this is what West Main Street looked like in Brevard in 1886, yet for some reason they needed a brick European courthouse. The structure does look slightly lifted off the street, kind of on a mound, as it could go below street level. They don't even know when it was originally built, as the official website says 1874, while the Transylvania Times article says it was constructed in 1879 and took 2 years. This is also what it says on the marker there. However, I found another reference that said it was constructed in 1873 and finished in a single year. And then it seems that the earliest photograph we have of this building is from 1886. So why is there not more early photographs and precise documentation on the construction of the structure? Seems like there are varying accounts on when exactly it was built and the time it took to finish. Oh, and there's this strange elk sculpture on the corner of the courthouse. Sure, I mean, you can have an elk sculpture, but it's important to consider its association with fraternities and elite clubs. Speaking of, they do have a fairly large Masonic lodge here. I thought the history was pretty interesting. Dunn's Rock Lodge first met in 1866. Apparently after the Civil War, Transylvania volunteers in the Confederate Army decided to become Masons for no exact reason and wanted to start a lodge after the war. So essentially, and you'll find this with many of these cities, is that the Freemasonic Lodge was founded before the founding of the city, or heavily associated in its early beginnings. Why would that need to be the case? Is there a correlation between secret societies and the founding of a town? If so, you would think that would be an important footnote to mention, but no, they don't really talk about it. 2 miles south of Brevard, there's a marker where the first lodge building was erected, and it's on this large standing rock stone. I believe that the building today with the pillars was originally built in the 50s, so I don't think it's old world, but interesting that a small town like this would have a lodge of this size. There is a church that stands out, St. Philip's Episcopal Church, which they say was built in 1926. Apparently there was an original wooden church in its exact location, but then on Christmas 1925 there was a fire that destroyed the building. I tried looking for old photos of the place, but there doesn't seem to be any online. It has a very castle-like appearance and the interiors are quite beautiful. Might not be old world, but still worth bringing up. The next building of interest is the Ethelwold Hotel. Built in 1901, it is the largest hotel from the early 20th century still standing in Brevard. It is a Queen Anne style of architecture, originally built by the McMinn family and named after John McMinn's wife, Ethel. The Ethelwold catered to wealthy travelers with modern amenities like a cafe, barbershop, and grocer on the ground floor. However, what makes the hotel stand out is its connection to powerful figures, including John D. Rockefeller and former President William Howard Taft, who reportedly stayed there. Why did such influential individuals visit this relatively small mountain town? Was the Ethelwold merely a picturesque stop on their travel, or was it a discreet meeting place for elites to meet up, like Lake Toxway? I did find one supposed construction photo of this building, but it has no date and was taken from an angle in front of the courthouse. This is the only photo I could find, and it seems suspiciously close to the courthouse. There are no other stages of its construction available. It's not impossible, but this base structure doesn't look the right size. How can we verify whether this is really the hotel being built or something else entirely? The grain and quality of the photographs seem more consistent with the 1930s than with 1901 or earlier, and we don't even know how long it took to construct. I checked the digital North Carolina records, and this photo isn't listed on there, nor is it on the main Transylvania County website that documents the hotel's history. It only appears on this one news article, which provides no details about when it was taken. When you look at the oldest known photos of the hotel, the grain matches what you'd expect from that time period, but it doesn't look newly built at all. None of these photos are even dated, making it difficult to determine how long the building had been standing. While it's not conclusive, but one thing that I noticed is that the patio area in one photo appears to have a pillar that was painted over. Not sure why they would do that. I mean, maybe it was done to make the photo look better, but it's worth noting that photographs of the time were often touched up. Then there's the fraternity building, conveniently located right across the street from the Ethelwold Hotel. What a coincidence that the elites were meeting up here. Notice how the history of the Ethelwold completely avoids any mention of secret societies, yet, right in front of it stood this impressive building called the Fraternity Building. Built in 1907 by the Dunn's Rock Building Company, which is the Masonic lodge that we discussed earlier. Seems suspicious. And just like the Ethelwold, there are no construction photos of this building either. Officially, it first served as a jewelry shop, a furniture business, and later as a post office until 1926. But there's no solid timeline or detailed records about its construction or original purpose. What we do know is that the second story was used for lodge meetings until a new lodge was built in the 1950s. How long they had been meeting there is unclear, but the name Fraternity Building would suggest that it was intended for that purpose from the start, if we believe the mainstream story about its 1907 construction. Which is unlikely, given that there is no clear documentation of the structure being built, and the earliest photos we do have show burn marks and grime on the facade. Why would a brand new structure already appear so damaged? And why would anyone choose to ruin the original facade later on? This happens in countless downtowns, and it makes no sense unless the goal was to downplay the building's impressive architecture and obscure its history. If preserving history was the priority, you'd restore and celebrate a building like this, not let it fall into disrepair or alter its original design. It's also located where the Children's Center Emporium and Art Gallery is. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but kind of strange to have a children's store in an old Masonic lodge building. There are more buildings, but those were the ones that stood out to me. There is the Brevard banking building. They say it was built in 1924, but the earliest photo I could find is from 1928 and has vanilla skies, so they cut the sky and cables out for some reason. And this photo is in the archives like this. Interestingly, the company was founded in 1898 and at one point was housed in the Ethelwold Hotel until 1925 when it was moved to this building. Just another connection to the hotel being connected to elites. Oh, and there's this antique shop that's right in front of the bank. A lot of cool old stuff in here, but clearly this goes beneath street level. There are other buildings downtown that go beneath the street as well. So you have to keep that in mind. Not only do they not give us clear documentation of when these structures were built, but they go a level or more beneath the street. Okay, but one of the most memorable things about Brevard are the squirrels. I know, I'm always mentioning some squirrel, but this is actually weird and super unique. Apparently, Brevard's whole thing is that they have white squirrels, it's like their mascot or something. But this story's insane, not sure if I believe it. But the story goes that Brevard is the only city in America with true white squirrels. They aren't albino either, they have a white fur coat, and they say that these squirrels come from a traveling carnival truck that crashed and they escaped. So yeah, and they started breeding and somehow stayed local to Transylvania County. But we actually ran into one at the park and they're beautiful. Just to see these little white creatures bouncing around, it's literally like spotting a shiny Pokemon. We were driving all around Transylvania County and there were some gorgeous waterfalls along the way. It's actually known as the Land of Waterfalls. There were a few on the highway that we stopped to check out, but we did this crazy hike at the end of the day at Rainbow Falls, and that was an impressive waterfall. I'll finish off with talking about a lost colony in Transylvania County. There's a stone near Brevard that has a plaque that marks the spot where there was a Cherokee village called Conisty that mysteriously disappeared in 1777. This is North Carolina's lost colony, where British troops first found the ancient Indian village of Canasta in 1725. However, when explorers returned in 1777, the people and entire city had vanished. However, there's an interesting Cherokee legend that discusses what happened to these people in their city. According to the legend, there was an entrance to another realm that was discovered behind these waterfalls, and the Conisty people decided to travel into these openings through the waterfall into another world. They moved to a new village inside the earth. The tribesmen declined to enter, but once he refused the entrance to this realm, it was blocked with a solid rock wall with no access. This is just like when Link had to pass through the waterfall to enter Zora's domain. But yeah, I thought this was an interesting legend and it had me thinking as I was looking at these waterfalls. In many cases, you can see small entrances, and I'm sure there are large openings or caverns inside that lead to a massive underground world. Is that what happened to North Carolina's lost colony? Brevard is a beautiful mountain city, but I feel that we're not being told the entire story. Perhaps this lost colony connects to the forgotten history of Brevard, and there was already infrastructure here that they don't tell us about. Not to mention all the elites that have been through this area, it definitely brings to question the history we're told. I'll leave it at that, and we have a few more smaller cities to discuss before the big project that's going to come out. So stay tuned, tell your friends about us, and all we can hope is that our minds may be unveiled.
Let go of everything you think to be true. Relax the mind and ask the question, do I truly understand what this reality is?